This short lecture on the painter Gustave Courbet and his painting called Bonjour Monsieur Courbet. And this is taken from a Smarthistory essay, and you can find the citation at the end of this. All right, so the painting that we're going to look at was painted in 1854. It's oil on canvas, and it's by the painter Gustave Courbet, and it's called The Meeting, or Bonjour Monsieur Courbet. In other words, good day, Mr. Courbet. And so here it is, and we're going to see the painter himself, Gustave Courbet, on the right-hand side. And then this is a gentleman that he's meeting, and the dog of the gentleman, and then the gentleman's servant. And we're going to see that this is kind of a selfie by Courbet, and that he packs a lot into this image. All right, so let's talk about the painter Gustave Courbet and the avant-garde. So arguably the most influential artist of the 19th century movement called French Realism, Gustave Courbet, and here is a way to help you pronounce it, Gustave Courbet. He is the first major figure that we can identify as avant-garde. And the avant-garde is going to be really important moving forward. And so this is originally a French military term, which was taken by artists or by people to describe certain groups of radical artists and thinkers. And avant means advanced or forward, and garde is similar to the English guard or soldier. So the original phrase referred to the vanguard, or the troops that pushed ahead of the main battalions at great personal risk. So these are the people that are kind of out on the forefront. They're the people that are daring to do things that are criticized, but then later, really loved. In the art world, avant-garde refers to those artists willing to risk their reputations in search of new methods of visual expression that break down old, ineffective approaches to art making. And so moving forward from here, we're going to see realism, we're going to see impressionism, we're going to see post-impressionism. All of these are groups of artists who are taking these risks in visual expression. The avant-garde is always ahead of the pack, but their new ideas, if ultimately successful, are often adopted by the masses. So at first, these are the people that we're throwing rotten tomatoes at, right? But later on, we start to think, wow, those guys were really ahead of the pack, and they were smart, and then we start to, adopt their ideas. All right, so let's introduce Courbet, and here he is in a little detail from the painting. In his canvas, The Meeting, from 1854, Courbet has painted himself on the right side. The self-portrait offers a number of significant clues as to how the artist thought of himself, or perhaps how he wishes to be seen. So, we can think of the Kardashians, taking their selfies and, carefully sculpting how we're going to see them or how they want to be seen. So Courbet's doing the same thing here. So rather like dressing in the morning or applying makeup, if you do, a self-portrait allows for a degree of control over the way that others perceive you. And Courbet then is announcing who he is. Our job is to read the clues that this image offers. So this means we have to look carefully at the image and think about the way that Courbet is producing himself, the way he's painting himself. And sometimes we think of, oh, these painters, they just throw something down on the canvas. Well, that is very much not the case. He's carefully thinking about the way he's going to present himself to the viewer in contrast with the other people in the image. So looking closely at the painting, Bonjour Monsieur Courbet, what visual clues help identify each person? So before you say to yourself, I don't know how to do this, remember that you are, in fact, an expert in reading the clues given by the people around you. Every day you respond to body language, types and styles of clothing, facial expression, hand gesture, and environmental context. These judgments are based upon your quick and quite sophisticated assessment of these sorts of clues. So look at these figures as actors on a stage, or as Courbet has suggested, people that you run across as you stroll down a country lane. What do the costumes, the props, and the interactions express? So Courbet, oops, sorry you guys. Duplicate slide. Okay, we know that Courbet comes from Ornans in eastern France. And so again, this is quite outside of the orbit of Paris. In Paris, it's high society, it's the cutting edge, but he does not come from Paris. He comes from the country, right? So here Courbet is self-sufficient. So he carries on his back a folding easel, you can see here, and everything that he needs. So in his backpack, he's got his paint, his canvas, his palette, oil, turpentine, and rags to paint directly from nature. Look, he's got his hat, he's got his walking stick, he's got his walking boots, right? And so he is very self-sufficient. Bruyas, so again, this is who he meets. Bruyas, on the other hand, has to be trailed by a servant, right? So he can't even be walking outside by himself. He has to have his servant who's holding his hat, his jacket, and he carries only this small cane. And so there's really a contrast between this very well-dressed gentleman who needs his dog to protect him and his servant, whereas this is Courbet. He's outside on his own, self-sufficient. So one can imagine that Bruyas and his servant had been transported by a carriage in the background, so you can see the carriage over here. And as they're in the countryside, ill-prepared, while Courbet has evidently been making his way on foot. So Courbet walks there, he's going to walk home. Whereas if this man's carriage breaks down, he's going to be in trouble, stuck in the countryside. The meeting between the two men represents the vitality of the countryside in contrast to the mannered style of the city. So even though the different treatment of Bruyas and Courbet's beard, look at Courbet, his beard is all, it's not trimmed, it's just, it's just very natural. But look at Bruyas obviously had, a servant who helped him carefully trim his beard. Though related to each man's true likeness, further underscores the contrast of this sort of stuffy aesthete to the worker artist. So this man was a patron, a supporter of Courbet's, but Courbet's really making the difference. I'm the one doing the work. I'm the one walking the land. I'm the one carrying what I need on my back, whereas you are, traveling in a carriage with a servant to carry. And so this again is something that is important to Courbet in his view of the community, the artist community. So the issue that we've discussed before, the exaltation of the countryside as the Industrial Revolution progressed, sees its full expression in this work. So this really is Courbet's manifesto. Here is the artist, the man of the country who goes his own way. All right, Courbet's politics, unlike the other great painters of rural life and labor, such as the French realist Jean-Francois Millet, the artist Gustave Courbet was very politically active. In 1848, he witnessed and read about a series of unsuccessful uprisings in France, England, and Germany. These revolts had been inspired by earlier Enlightenment thinking. Unlike the American and French revolutions of the 18th century, however, these more modern actions are fueled by the deprivations and mass dislocations caused by the industrialization of Western Europe. And so these are people who are of the working class, who are usually not considered in a fine art context, and who are, in fact, very dangerous to the rich people who would be buying these paintings. So they really don't want to hear about these poor workers whose lives have been really radically changed in a bad way by the Industrial Revolution. But Courbet, on the other hand, is very interested in them. As a fair capitalism of the 19th century, both built massive fortunes. Some people got very, very rich, but then they also created slums where people lived in absolute poverty, and life was really bad for a lot of people at this time. And this is what Courbet is asking not necessarily us, but asking the people of his time to think about. What are these people that we're ignoring? These are people that aren't wealthy enough to buy paintings, right? So most people aren't going to show them in their paintings, but Courbet did. So when we think of the economic system currently employed in the United States, we think of modern capitalism. After all, the planned socialist economy of the Iron Curtain, so the Soviet Union and its allies, have been discredited. However, before we come to feel too smug, we should remember that our system is actually a highly socialized capitalism, which is a good thing in the most case. As stated earlier, pure capitalism is brutal. And this period saw young children working, chiseling coal from tunnels too narrow for adults, and the common use of poisonous substances without even rudimentary safeguards required for workers. And we know that these are still issues, right? So if you think about where the products that you buy come from, might children in other parts of the world today have been, used to make these products. So these are still ideas that we think about and that are relevant for us today. There was no safety net back then beyond one's family and church, and many died of neglect, starvation, and disease. And Courbet is asking us to think about these folks. What is realism? So the term that Courbet used for his painting, realism, might be a little bit different than what we think about realism. So politically speaking, Courbet considered himself a Republican. And again, this is not like our Democrat and Republican. It's a little bit different. This is the sense of someone who supported the idea of France as a republic, as a democracy. And Courbet believed, like the art critic Charles Baudelaire, that artists needed to turn their attention to modern life, so life in his time. They believed that artists should find beauty within the world that existed, not within the world of the past. So if you think back to the High Renaissance, when we saw the greats like Michelangelo painting scenes from the Bible, or we saw Raphael painting, the School of Athens, all of these philosophers who had died many hundreds of years ago, Courbet would argue that it was much more important for artists to paint what they saw around them IRL, we might say, right, in real life. Courbet is saying the Bible scenes are not happening now. Courbet had a very famous line that he used. He said, "If you show me an angel, then I'll paint an angel." In other words, he's saying I'm not painting something that's made up, that I have to imagine. I'm painting something that I'm seeing around me in real life. And for us, this might seem like, yeah, that's a perfectly normal thing to think about, right? But back then, this was quite a radical stance for Courbet to take. So for Courbet, the foundation of realist art is not art that was retold the story of ancient Greece or Rome or the Bible, but that art that was of his time. And so we might think of realism as naturalistic or being faithful to what one sees, but for Courbet, realism had more to do with what is being represented in the painting. And so for Courbet, he says, quote, "This is the other world of ordinary life. The people, misery, poverty, riches, the exploited, the exploiters, those who live on death." So he wants to paint more than just a famous battle scene from the past or a scene from the Bible. He wants to paint what he sees around him. Courbet felt that it was so important not just to paint the world of riches, but to paint someone who is poor, who doesn't have enough to eat, who wears torn clothes, or in this case, the servant whose clothes are old and don't fit. So for Courbet, he wanted to change what people considered important in painting. And when you look at his painting called The Stonebreakers, think about this definition of realism. All right, thank you very much. Oh, here's our citations. Sorry, guys. Here's our citations. And if you want a little bit more information about Courbet, click on this link and watch. This is about an 8-minute video on the Artist Studio, but it'll really walk you through Courbet and his thinking about realism, his politics, and the way he painted.